Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers. I see we've been joined by one of tonight's panelists, Larry McDermott. Larry, I've just muted you, and if you don't mind just muting your video, we'll be calling upon you in just a few moments once the event proper gets underway. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here tonight, both live in the webinar and viewing on YouTube now or potentially in the future, as this video will remain live. We are here tonight to celebrate the launch of The Politics of the Canoe, published by the University of Manitoba Press. I am John Taves from McNally Robinson Booksellers. We're broadcasting tonight live from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We have a number of contributors here tonight who will speak on the book, and the book itself, the launch itself, will be hosted by tonight's volume editors. We also have a special guest from the Canadian Canoe Museum, so I will not take up too much of your time with my advanced housekeeping notes. I just want to let you know a few things about tonight. First of all, if you are looking to purchase a copy of The Politics of the Canoe, and we do hope you will, copies are available from McNally Robinson Booksellers. You can either visit us in person, you can give us a call, or you can order the book online, and we deliver both locally, nationally, and internationally. I'll put some details about how you can get a copy of the book into the chat as soon as I'm finished speaking. At the close of the event, there'll be the opportunity to ask questions of some of the participants. You'll notice that there's a Q&A box, which may be found just at the bottom of your screen. Please, as questions occur to you, feel free to write them in there, and then tonight's editors will be able to very easily find them all in a single space. That's not to say you can't chat amongst yourselves in the chat itself or make any comments as you'd like. At the end of the evening, I'll be copying the chat and sending it to tonight's contributors, so they'll all be able to see everything that you've said about them and about the book itself. I'd also like to point out one other thing that's a little bit special about this evening, in that in addition to the contributors that are already scheduled to speak tonight, we have a number who will be viewing this event. Just so that you're aware, if you are viewing this event, you may be called upon to just say a few words potentially, if you are comfortable doing so. That would just be audio only. And in that case, when you are called upon, please just press the button marked raise hand, which you'll also find at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then I'll be able to give you the power to speak at that point. So a few housekeeping notes, but I hope those were all generative for everybody here. And I'll be back at the end to review purchase procedure again. But without further ado, I will introduce tonight's hosts and the editors of the volume. First, Bruce Erickson is an associate professor in the Department of Environment and Geography at the University of Manitoba. His work investigates the cultural politics of recreation and tourism within the context of settler colonialism in Canada and beyond. He is the author of Canoe Nation, Nature, Race, and the Making of a National Icon. Sarah Wylie Krotz is an associate professor of English literature at the University of Alberta. Her research explores the complex web of relations among literature, land, and ecological thought. She is the author of Mapping with Words, Anglo-Canadian Literary Cartographies, 1789 to 1916. Please join me in virtually welcoming your hosts for this evening.
Hi there, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. It's a real privilege to have so many folks come. Sarah and I will say a few words about the book in a moment, but actually I want to first call on Laura Piers. Laura Piers is the exhibit project manager at the Canadian Canoe Museum, where she's responsible for developing the exhibits that are going into her new book. We're gracious for the support of the museum with this project, and we would like to invite her to say a few words of welcome before we get into it. So I'll pass it off to you now, Laura.
Thank you very much, Bruce. I'm joining you tonight from Mississauga-Anishinaabe territory in Ontario, from within 2 blocks of the Trent Severn Waterway, and from my role at the Canadian Canoe Museum, where we're very much thinking about the tensions around canoes and those kinds of overlapping spaces. And especially as we begin to plan exhibits for the new building that will open in 2023. I also want to begin by acknowledging the grief and the rage that we are all experiencing after the discovery of the children's graves at Kamloops. And certainly as a museum, we are struggling to process those emotions in the context of the exhibits that we're planning. It says a lot about the power of the canoe and about this group of authors that we can come together tonight at this time in a respectful and even hopeful way to share knowledge across cultures. And it gives me a great deal of hope and comfort to be with you all tonight. And it gives me great joy on behalf of the Canadian Canoe Museum to celebrate the launch of this book into the world. The Politics of the Canoe is a unique contribution to a growing literature on the canoe as a powerful symbol and an equally powerful material force in cultures and histories. The book resonates so strongly with the Canoe Museum's work, and especially with the discussions we're having now about exhibition planning. It speaks about the canoe as something that embodies complex knowledges, something that links people within and across communities. It links generations, it links cultures. And these are core themes to our discussions at the museum right now. As a settler who works with Indigenous people, what I especially appreciate about the book is the span of the perspectives in these essays. From Rachel Cushman's beautiful and powerful words as a puller, talking about pulling and healing and sovereignty, to John Bezos' co-creation of the Amazing Trails of Our Ancestors program, in which paddling becomes an act of engaging with traditional territory, with the beings and relationships that comprise that territory, that renews ancient knowledge in the present and reasserts, again, forms of sovereignty. To Jonathan Goldner's thoughtful piece on the embodied and political nature of learning traditional skills as a settler apprentice, and everything in between in this book. Thank you especially to Danielle Gendron for helping me to see the Trent Severn Waterway in new ways. Every part of this book really is about the role of canoes in helping us all to come to a new understanding about the lands and the waters and the territories in which we live. And I would like to thank the editors and contributors, some of whom are already part of the Canadian Canoe Museum community, and others whom we hope very much to work with in the future, for providing such wonderful food for thought for all of us. Congratulations on this book. Back to you, Sarah and Bruce.
Thanks so much, Laura. That was wonderful. I'm touched. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. We wanted to say a little bit about this. I'm joining you from Winnipeg, and Sarah, as she'll say in a moment, is coming from Edmonton. And I just want to say a few words, a little bit about the sort of overview of the canoe, and maybe answer the question that so many people ask when we talk about this book, which is why a book on the politics of the canoe, or for that matter, what are the politics of the canoe? And I know that for all of us who've canoed, there's no doubt that canoeing is an activity that offers a lot of time to think. The passing rhythm of waves and strokes offer cover to get lost in thought, and the conversations amongst paddling partners and teams often prompts new insights or questions. Sarah and I grew up paddling in and around Winnipeg. We both spent summers as visitors in Northwestern Ontario. And then we moved on to careers as academics, where much of our thinking and conversation, unfortunately, doesn't take place in the canoe, but in classrooms, offices, and coffee shops. Yet, for both of us, canoes have been an important part of how we do our work. I have no doubt that my experience teaching people how to do a J-stroke or understand what an eddy is has made my classroom teaching better than it would have been without that. Now, we've also made canoeing an object of interest for the work that we do. And this is what led us to start the process for the book. We knew that we weren't the only ones who spent time thinking in and about canoes. And so we wanted to bring some of those people together and see what kind of conversations we could have. We were also interested in the kinds of conversations that thinking carefully about the canoe could allow us to have, which is why we asked specifically about the politics of the canoe. As we write in the book, the canoe is not merely a simple object of wilderness enjoyment. It is not a neutral vessel in which paddlers invest their own personal meanings. It has deep and varied historical, cultural, and political significance that changes over in different contexts. Colonialism certainly looms large over this history of the canoe, but canoes are also inverted in histories of masculinity, wilderness, consumption, and industrialization, among others. Over the past 20 years, there has been an increasing recognition of these contexts and differences, So we wanted to bring together an array of perspectives to help fill our understanding of the canoe as a political object. Canoes are embedded in power relationships, and they're shaped by the beliefs, ideologies, and institutions through which we govern ourselves and are governed. They contribute to the stories we tell ourselves about how we fit into and conduct ourselves in the world. Thus, they are intimately and inextricably linked to negotiations of territory, nation, history, environmental issues, class, gender, race, ethnicity, and culture. And we also think that canoes beyond these things are actually gateways to other conversations. So rethinking the history and politics of the canoe can also lead us to ask these same kinds of questions about other parts of the world. Now, in the end, in response to our sort of request to try to figure this out, we received a number of excellent responses to our call to join this conversation, some of which we are lucky enough to have join us tonight at this launch, and others you'll have to read the book to find out. We were lucky enough to be able to get together at Fort White Alive, an environmental education center on the southwest side of Winnipeg. And Rachel reminded us today that it was actually 3 years ago today that we started this conference. What this means is that the creation of this book was a long time coming, and that it relied upon the help of many folks not credited on the cover. We list a number of them in our acknowledgements of the book, but I also want to point out a couple right now. And obviously, our contributors are a significant part of this. And so I actually just want to, I'm going to pull up, if I can here. Oh, there we go. A slide of them. Where is that? There we go. Apologies there. So I'm assuming you can see a little bit of that. Sorry if it's small on the screens that you're on. Our contributors are fantastic. They put a lot of time in to tell their story, and they really are wonderful stories. We're really honored to have them in the book here. And Sarah's going to give you a little bit more of a rundown of those in a second. We also want to thank the team at the University of Manitoba Press. They were instrumental from the start of this book. But for tonight, I also want to make a particular send particular thanks to Nicole Haldupas for coordinating the privilege to launch this book virtually with McNally. Thanks, of course, also to McNally and John Taves for providing us with this virtual space for the launch, where we really appreciate this opportunity. And of course, thanks to you in the audience for coming. It's both playoff season and paddling season, so I know the demands on your time are great, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Sarah, who will perhaps give you a better sense of what to expect from the book itself. See if I can figure this out. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Bruce, and thank you, Laura, for those words of welcome. And I too am going to share my screen just to keep that table of contents open in front of you, because I am aware that, let's see here. I am aware that you don't have the privilege of just picking up a copy of the book and flipping through it, unless you have it already, in which case you should. Here we go. But I would like to keep those chapters in front of you. I am so happy to be here. Even if only virtually with you all, just to see this book come out into the world. It's great to see so many friends, family, colleagues here. I would just like to acknowledge that I'm joining from Edmonton, which is on Treaty 6 territory in the Métis Nation of Alberta's Region 4. And like Bruce, I learned to paddle a canoe on Lake of the Woods on Treaty 3 territory. And it was there at the YMYWCA Camp Stevens long ago that I eventually became a canoe tripper with Bruce, sort of in our pre-academic life, along with some other folks who are here tonight. So hello to you all. And I have to say that much like a canoe trip, this book has been a really wonderful collaborative process. Our hope when we dreamed up this project was that the book would offer a really wide range of perspectives, and I think that it does. Tonight you get to hear from 4 contributors to chapters in the book that specifically showcase the significance of canoes to Indigenous nations, from the yearly tribal journeys that take place in ocean-going dugout canoes on the Pacific Northwest coast to the relationship between canoe tripping and Klito land and sovereignty in what many now know as the Northwest Territories, to the connections between Algonquin birch bark canoe building and law and governance in Algonquin territories in the East. Along with these stories, the book tells a number of others that enliven our sense of what canoes mean and what they do. As you can hopefully see from the table of contents here, the book includes meditations on the physical, material, and environmental knowledge that comes from learning to harvest birch bark, on the Indigenous stories, language, and territorial histories that lie within the archive of Tappan Adney's famous model canoes. It includes a historian's take on how a canoe can help solve a mystery about a 1688 exploration narrative, an essay about how canoes and activists came together to fight the damming of the Petawawa River, and a chapter that you Winnipeggers out there might especially like about Don Starkell's monumental trip to the Amazon, and why Starkell's story has never quite fit into the dominant Canadian canoe narrative. A concluding chapter captures what we really feel is the spirit of this project as a whole. Following part of a canoe route that her Métis voyageur ancestor once traveled, Danielle Gendron invites recreational canoeists like me and like many of us here to both metaphorically and materially repack our canoes, and thus to become more conscious of the meanings and histories of these vessels and the places that they carry us through. And now, without further ado, I'm really pleased and honored to welcome the 4 contributors to chapters in this book that recount the diverse ways in which canoes remain critically important to Indigenous resurgence and sovereignty. First, I would like to introduce Rachel Cushman and John Daehnke. Rachel Cushman is the descendant of Clatsop Chief Wasilta and an elected secretary and treasurer of the Chinook Indian Nation. All of her work is grounded in the commitment to carrying on Chinook cultural protocols and exercising sovereignty and self-determination. A dedicated leader of the Chinook canoe family, Cushman is also a mother to her sons Kanim, which means canoe, and Isik, which means paddle. She is also, as if that doesn't seem busy enough, a PhD student in the Indigenous Race and Ethnic Studies program at the University of Oregon. And speaking alongside her today is John Daehnke, an associate professor in the anthropology department at the University of California, Santa Cruz. John's research, conducted in collaboration with the Chinook Indian Nation, focuses on the anthropology and history of the Pacific Northwest and has led him to recognize and write about the fundamental importance of canoe revitalization and the protocols attached to canoe culture. So welcome, Rachel and John. So great to see you tonight, and we're looking forward to hearing you talk a bit about your chapter.
So I am Rachel Cushman Nike Yaho. Nike it's welcome in Saika Chinook Indian Nation and Saika Clatsip, Kathlamit, Wakaikam, Willipop, Lord Chinook. Hi, my name is Rachel Cushman. Sarah did a really great job of introducing me. Did you want to introduce yourself, John?
Hi, Rachel. It's nice for me to see Rachel because we're in different places right now. So it's great to see you. I'm speaking to you from Santa Cruz, California, which is Awaswas territory. I have the privilege and pleasure to work here on Awaswas lands. And these lands are now stewarded and cared for by the Amamutsan tribal band of Indians who are here also in the area surrounding Gilroy. So I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel because she's really the driver of this chapter. And at the end, I can talk a little bit about that too. But we're going to turn it back over to Rachel for her words.
Okay. So John and I collaborated with Tony Johnson, the chairman of the Chinook Indian Nation, on This Is What Makes Us Strong, Canoe Revitalization, Reciprocal Heritage in the Chinook Indian Nation. And in this chapter, our methodology is the colonial methodology of using autoethnographies coupled with history and an analysis to really talk about all of those things. And so we start off our chapter with a testimony from me talking about my experiences and the colonial projects in which we live in. And in that, we also talk about the birth of my first son, Kaneem, and that experience, and really it covers, prior to my existence, it was not practiced openly, a lot of these protocols and traditions, because it was against the law. And so the revitalization of culture and protocols and really the stories about my son and the generations coming up, that they don't have that experience, that they're growing up in a culture that is strong and powerful, and they don't have to hide any parts of themselves. And it's not just about my son. So that's just the beginning. And then we go into it a little bit and we talk about protocols and how important they are and what exactly are protocols, and they're, as we say in the book, they are our ways of interacting with the world that is dictated by our ancestors, but not in a way that's nostalgic, but in a way that's forward thinking. And so then we, talk about other things, other colonial issues like alcoholism and a depression that are healed through the revitalization of these protocols and the continuation of these protocols throughout with the canoe. And it goes on, but I actually wanted to read the last testimony in it to you all, just to give you a little idea. And it's healing. Oh, not that one. Sorry, wrong page. It's Kaneem's first leg. So Kaneem, just to preface for you all, Kaneem is 7, going to be 8 shortly. So this was a while ago, but my sons know who they are and where they come from. If you ask my eldest who his people are, he responds, I'm Chinook. My name is Kaneem, and it means canoe in Chinook. My brother is Isik, and that means paddle in Chinook. We are Chinook. My children were born into a post-colonial world. They are the product of the United States government's broken treaties, boarding schools, relocation policies, termination era policies, and a corrupt federal Indian recognition process. We weren't supposed to survive. We aren't supposed to be here. According to some, we aren't here. Our existence is resistance. Our canoes and protocols are the fists of our elders hitting the negotiation table at the Chehalis River Treaty Council of 1855. We would not give up our identity then, and we will not give it up now. We will continue to teach our children. We will continue to represent our people as our ancestors have instructed us to. We know who we are. We sing our songs. We dance our dances. We tell our stories. We know our land and travel our waters. We honor our ancestors by continuing to teach and practice our protocols with our children. On July 23rd, 2018, 10 days before Kaneem's 5th birthday, He traveled his first lake in the canoe during tribal journeys since his birth. This was his 5th tribal journey, but he had not traveled in the canoe. He was excited for his first lake. He was prideful, and finally, he was a big kid. When it came time to carry Cushman down to the water, Kaneem found his place along the gunwale with all the other pullers and helped carry the canoe down. He got in the canoe, found his seat, and patiently waited permission to leave shore from the Samish community. He sat quietly with his head held high. As per Chinook protocols, 5 is a very important number in our community. For me, Kaneem's first leg was a monumental moment. This was Kaneem's 5th journey on the cusp of his 5th birthday. I was unable to be in the canoe with him on his first leg, but he carried me with him. I couldn't have been prouder. I know our ancestors were too, and this is what makes us strong. And I thought it was important to share that, because I feel like that, just that passage in itself, like, if somebody could read just that passage of this book, I'd be happy. And, it's really exciting is that this is a legacy for my children that, that they get to see that they're a part of something and it makes them prideful, and I really want them to be proud of who they are and where they come from. It's so important. And, it's actually really funny. We're going to include an extension to that because right as we were turning in our final chapters, Kaneem actually pulled his first journey on he was 6 years old in the exact same place. Instead of going from Swinomish to Samish, or no, Samish to Swinomish, he was going from Swinomish to Samish and going the opposite direction, but the same leg. And I actually got to be with him in that pull, that leg. And it was actually funny because he was right behind me. I was lead pulling. He was right behind me, and I had his younger brother strapped to my chest and was like pulling over his head, like trying not to hit him at all. It was quite a fun day for us. But I don't know, I could talk forever about this, and it was just really an exciting opportunity to participate in. I've made some really great friends from this book. And actually it inspired me to start writing again. And that's how I got into the doctoral program at the University of Oregon. And yeah, so thank you.
So I'll follow up with just a few words. It's really been one of the best sort of both professional and personal experiences for me to have the honor and privilege to work with the Chinook Indian Nation. I first sort of met people in the Chinook Indian Nation way back in 1999 as I came to graduate school there in Portland State. I remember meeting Gary Johnson, who was the tribal chair at the time and who is Tony Johnson's father. And he sat down and talked to me for a long time. And I just remember thinking, this person is so gracious and this is also interesting. And what eventually happened is over the course of sort of both the master's work that I did there, as well as later doctoral work, I came to work with a lot of people in the nation, Rachel included. And at the first stage, that ended up with a book called Chinook Resilience, which was published by the University of Washington Press. And that book initially, my initial intentions were was to do more of sort of an archaeological history, talk a little bit about the Chinook Indian Nation's dealings and occasional frustrations with things like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other sorts of places. But one of the things that happened during the process of working on that book, and I was working really closely, especially with Tony, but some other folks as well, is how apparent reciprocal protocols were to everything. Notions of reciprocity and responsibility and how those were so integrally connected to other items, other people, and other material things, and specifically the canoe. And that really sort of changed the direction of that work to where we sort of ended up with a culminating chapter sort of on the importance of the canoe. But I wasn't quite happy with it because it was missing something. And I knew that had to be there. And so when this opportunity came up to work with Bruce and Sarah, we sent in a proposal, and because we know, I was talking with Tony about it, Tony Johnson, we knew we wanted to kind of expand this on there. And this was where we were so fortunate to have Rachel be able to step in. Because I think what you've just heard here is the sort of added heart and relevance that her addition to this work brought, and really turned this from some work that was interesting and important to work that is really powerful and has such muscle. And so for me, it was it's just been a fantastic experience to be able to work with her directly on this, but also to be a beneficiary in a lot of ways of her good words here. And so I think at this point, I don't really have too much more to add, but so I'll turn it back to Rachel if you have anything else you want to add.
No, I think you covered it. I just want to thank Sarah and Bruce again for this opportunity in the inclusion of our community. And I also want to thank everybody from the community, from the Chinook community who is here tonight. There's quite a few of you, and quite a few of you from the University of Oregon. So thank you for being here and supporting us. And hope you all enjoy the rest of this talk.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John and Rachel. I have so much respect for that chapter and the work that you guys have done on it. I find it amazing. And I'm so glad, Rachel, that you read that paragraph. That's one of my favorite paragraphs from the book. I just love it so much. So we'll move on now to John Bizot. John Bizot is a Tl'itko knowledge holder and government advisor who led the land claims negotiations for the former Treaty 11 Council in Northwest Territories. Committed to reviving and celebrating Tl'itko language and culture through land-based programs, Zoe spearheaded the return to knowledge and storytelling through annual canoe trips. As he writes, the stories are really in the landscapes, and the pages turn with the dips of the paddle. So I invite John to come and share some words about the work that he's been doing in the North.
Yeah, well, thank you. I've been, as a kid, that our people, the Tl'itko Nation, they've been going to the Barrenlands by canoe since time immemorial. And, as a child, I really wanted to go. But then all of a sudden, just turning into a teen, it kind of stopped. And it stopped for about 16 years. And during that time, like any other kid, it was supposed to be my time. And, but, it just stopped. And eventually, I hooked up with some elders and some other people that have kind of had the same type of interest to revive these things. And so, we started working towards going on these trips, starting way back in the late 1980s, and didn't formally turn it into a program until 2005. But during that time, we were in a land claim and self-government negotiations, and what we brought to that table was the people that witnessed these canoes going to our annual gatherings, and they've got kids, they've got husbands, daughters, wives, grandfathers, grandmothers, some of them on the canoe trips. And for them to arrive in a community was a very emotional time. And it gave really, it resonated the purpose of achieving an agreement for us to continue these kind of things unhindered. And in the last 25 years, even if we average, about 50 people on an annual canoe trip, that means, in the last 25 years, we've taken out over 1,000, of a population of about 5 that we have right now. So it's really a blessing. At the same time, meeting other people that have the same enthusiasm about canoes, canoe making, and linking up with, people with the same type of interest, and leading to this publication. It's just never expected it, but I followed the process, and it's like a canoe trip. But this is the longest canoe trip I've been on. It's almost 2 years and a little bit over in putting these pages and these stories together, and the coordination and the thought process, even to this launching date, which has been long in coming. And it's just nice to be here. I'll see.
Thank you so much, John. It's such an honor to have you here, and your chapter is such a beautiful contribution to this book. I as someone who loves stories, especially, I really do adore that image of the land itself holding these stories, and the canoe carries you through them, almost a way of telling them or a way of reading them, as you and Jess did in your chapter. It's wonderful stuff. It's my privilege next to introduce Larry McDermott, who is our fourth and final speaker tonight. Larry McDermott is an Algonquin elder and knowledge holder from Shabbat Abadjuan, and he is the executive director of Plenty Canada, an Indigenous environmental organization based in Lanark, Ontario, where he has worked with master birch bark canoe builder Chuck Commanda, among others. And they've written this or collaborated on their chapter together. Larry is currently coordinating COVID-19 relief efforts with traditional people in Guatemala and Peru through his work with Plenty Canada. I'm really grateful that you could take some time with us today. Larry, welcome.
Miigwech. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, it's great to be here. Good to see everyone again. John, who I've known a long time, back when he was land claim negotiator and before I was. But a number of thoughts come to mind with what I've heard so far. And first, I want to acknowledge our ancestors who not only taught us the importance of the canoe and passed on from generation to generation the knowledge of making a canoe and the knowledge of making a canoe in a good way. And of course, in our chapter, we talk about getaway Daehnke. That is that all things are connected, and that when we create something, we create it through the physical properties of that creation, through mental capacities, but also what's often overlooked in Western culture is that empathic or that heart connection and that spiritual connection. And that we have certain traditions and ceremonies that help line those 4 ways of knowing up, and to bring that strength that comes from those 4 knowledge points into creating something that reflects balance. that reflects those important points of knowledge, points of knowing. What I feel is especially important in these particular times, and the 215 children from the residential school in Kamloops was mentioned earlier. And it's a shocking discovery on the one hand, but it's more than an indictment of residential schools. It's an indictment of supercilious thinking, of thinking that one way of knowing one race was superior, to the point where it got so out of hand that kids were stolen, that all kinds of things were done, both sides of the border, to get rid of the so-called Indian problem. And so the Canoe, I've witnessed the Canoe bring people back to a balanced place. I remember in particular with Chuck Commanda and myself, I was asked to do the opening as elder for the all the deputy environment ministers from the territories and provinces, as well as the federal government in Canada. And I talked them into allowing Chuck to bring one of his canoes, actually one that he and I had worked on. And so we brought it in and we put it at the foot of the opposite end of the head table. And the chair invited all the deputy ministers and their assistants at lunch break to take a look at the canoe. And he said, you know, it'll just take 10 minutes or so. And, you know, it just won't take very long. Well, the meeting started an hour and a half. They gave themselves a big lunch. And 2 hours later, he actually had to ask people to sit down as they asked Chuck and I their questions about the canoe. And I see that about the canoe. I see it as it has a magic that helps people in what we have since called ethical space. It was part of Canada's responding to the Convention on Biological Diversity and Climate Change. And in fact, we organized ourselves and created a governance system that recognized both ways of knowing and made accommodations for both Indigenous peoples, ceremony. So all meetings were opened in ceremony and closed in ceremony. The smudge and gavel were equivalent. Robert's Rules of Order, the 7 grandmother teachings that are referred to in this chapter. And so I see that the canoe work its magic in those critically important processes involving the survival of our peoples, and reminding us that it's extremely foolish to think one way of knowing is superior, that it's actually got us into great difficulty in terms of the suffering of Mother Earth and the implications. Not only was it the children back then, and of course we still have those problems. They've just morphed into different kinds of problems. And we have the murdered, missing Indigenous women and girls. But we also have the assault on the feminine in general and Mother Earth herself. And so the canoe is a reminder that the materials come from the land. They come from the generosity of the only source, ultimately, of everything, which is the land. And the canoe teaches us. It teaches us that about the connection between land and water. It also teaches us about things like climate change. As Chuck has often said, it's much more difficult to find those that canoe grade bark because of what we've done to the forest. There's also problems with the cedar and the spruce. And with climate change, as I sit here, I'm mindful of the infestation we have of pests on our forest. Some are saying they haven't seen anything like it before. And so the canoe reminds us of balance, that if you lean one way or you lean the other, in a birch bark canoe, you run the risk of going for a swim. So in the journey that we've had of late, the canoe has been front and center in terms of being able to open up discussion about how we protect the land, how we continue those traditions, how we decolonize ourselves, and of course, some of the recent this recent revelation is a reminder that we need more than superficial platitudes, that we really need to come together, and that we need to work hard to decolonize ourselves, to find ways of living on the land that are within natural law. And really all of North America, including the US, was founded on the coming together of Indigenous peoples and Europeans at the Treaty of 1764. Though the Americans, once they defeated the British and then collaborated at the end of the War of 1812, didn't feel responsible to that the agreement of between Indigenous nations, some of whom took 3 months paddling by canoe, by the way, just to get to Niagara, to come together and agree to inculcate, that is, learn each other's legal systems. And from the Indigenous perspective, I'm thinking of Faith Keeper Oren Lyon from Syracuse, New York, but he was actually at Akwesasne in 1993. And on page 668 of the final report of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, quoted his perspective on natural law, a law that, as he pointed out, human beings can't change. And if they try to, if they ignore it, they will suffer, because they will violate the law of creation. And that's part of the balance that the canoe teaches us. So it was great. It was great to work with the whole team involved. And we're very grateful for that. And I just I know Sarah Nelson and Chuck Commanda aren't here to my knowledge, but they're a great team in working on this chapter. And I feel that there's so much relevance. It was also great to travel to Winnipeg, meet with the creators of the other chapters, and to hear their stories and how they were brought together. It does make me think about the written word, which is a Western approach, and oral history. And I feel this project, it might have been an opportunity back then to video interviews, but I think there's some great stories and imagery that came out of it. I remember in Winnipeg, people bring some beautiful photos of their canoes and their communities. And for all of that, I just want to express gratitude on behalf of our team for that experience, especially Chuck, who, by the way, is making some canoes for a ceremony involving caring for the land and senior ministers, and that approach I spoke earlier about ethical space. So Miigwech for the opportunities we've had so far, and for this continued canoe journey. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Larry. That was wonderful. Yeah, thanks to all of you for giving us a little bit of insight into your chapters and to the work that you're doing. we're coming sort of to the end of what we've had planned. So what we can do now is move into a question and answer period. If you do have questions, as John mentioned at the beginning, there is a little box that you can click at the bottom of your screen to type that into, and Sarah and I are happy to read it out and get folks to answer them. I'll also point out that I notice, as John said at the beginning, that we have some of our other contributors on the line. I see Cameron Baldessera out there, an author of a chapter, Chris Chapman. Hello, it's nice to see you. And then Ian Morrow and Hillary Beatty also there. I see you all there. So thanks for joining. And we might call on you if you get lucky. And I'm not sure, maybe I missed anybody. If there's anybody else there, let me know and I'll point you out. So yeah, Sarah, you have anything else you want to say?
Just that during the Q&A, can the other contributors on the panel turn on your video? Leave yourself muted until you want to speak, but can we turn on videos just so we're all kind of together?
That'd be great.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone. So maybe just if nobody has an immediate question, I might ask one, because I was really struck by what you said, Larry, about the irony in a way that we rely so much on the written word. This is a beautiful book. There's a lot of writing in it, and yet so many of these stories about canoes really emphasize how many teachings canoes carry just by virtue of their physical beings and how they are made and how they transport people, the protocols and ceremonies that are built around them, and just how much nonverbal knowledge is conveyed in all kinds of different contexts by and through canoes and canoeing. It was really striking. I don't know if I don't know if there is a question in there. It's to maybe open that up a little bit about the importance of the canoe as a, I don't want to say object, because Rachel, you have taught me that the canoe is a being to be honored in a very different way than just an object. But does anyone want to talk about that? How canoes actually carry us into different forms of knowledge that are really not so much about these Western, our Western reliance on the written word. John?
I just want to say that I've always known that there was place names wherever we go on the landscape. But the canoe in the last 30 plus years that I've been out there, there becomes a pattern that all these place names talk about your early history and how you came to know the land a lot. And it's also it's an inventory of where the food sources are. And it's a good inventory to study, because a lot of it can be used for mitigation issues and land management, because it talks about the sensitive areas, and it talks about places that you shouldn't go, and it talks about life, what it was like back then. And so the land is a big storybook, and all that we've done is put a few of our observations into this little book that is meant to inspire something in Canada that has been ignored for a long time. That was the beginning of a friendship that might have gone underground for many, many years. And now that we see a resurgence like Larry's talking about, is knowing that we're really connected to the land. It's where our stories are. It's where we come from, And the more we go to it, the stronger that we become. And so it's going back to do things that have strengthened us before. And a canoe is a form of strengthening. Let's see. Thank you.
So I mentioned it a little bit in our chapter, Bruce, or John and I mentioned it a little in our chapter about how we relate to the canoe and as a living entity, a living member of our community. You know, and I mean, it goes down to the actual physical structure, what we make our canoes out of that knowledge. You know, we only make our dugout canoes with old growth timber. And, you know, we have a process for acquiring it. It's getting harder and harder, but those timber are so important that, you know, they've been around a long time. They have watched a lot of stuff happen over time. And so they have a lot of knowledge of the land and of the people. And so we learn a lot from them just from the spirit that they carry. We have a saying that, you know, as long as there's one boy and one girl who listen well, and there's a canoe, like our culture is continued. It will stay continued. There, nothing can destroy it. And that's super important. But, you know, I mean, there's so many things that the canoe can teach you beyond that, like, you know, working together, trusting the canoe, you know, that, you know, our canoes are made in such a way that they're not very easy to tip out on the water. It takes some effort. And so it's like learning to trust yourself, your own body, learning to trust the people around you, and trust the canoe is going to protect you. And so, I mean, there are so many different ways that, you know, that we interact and communicate and learn from the canoe that, you know, goes beyond what is shared in this book. Yeah.
Thank you so much, you guys. I do see some questions in here. One coming from Robin White, asking whether there are references to art and its relationship to the canoe in the book. Yeah, would any of you guys like to speak to that? Larry, I'm thinking of, you know, Chuck's canoes and the really beautiful, striking images that he not carves, but I guess it's a kind of like etching into the birch bark. I don't know if you can speak to that without him here, or if anyone else would like to.
I can do that, Sarah. By the way, it's saying I can't turn my video on. Maybe that's for the benefit of everybody. I don't know. Anyhow, as far as you're right, it's etching, and I've done that. I've done it with Chuck, and some of what we do is we'll go into ceremony, and we ask for guidance on what symbols should be on the canoe, and there's every symbol that you see. Usually, well, you know, sometimes it's the sky world, sometimes it's earth, sometimes it's fish, often you'll see bear. Bear is a protector. Bear is a guardian of our medicines. And we actually consider ourselves to be a bear nation. So suffice it to say, you'll see a lot of bear on our canoe. Also, listening to Rachel, I know you can tell an Algonquin canoe from an Ojibwe canoe, from a Mi'kmaq canoe, that we have our patterns that work for us, and they're designed to maximize effectiveness in our environment. So in our case, it was mostly smaller rivers and lakes. And so it also is designed well for things like rice gathering, fishing, and but still for transporting meat. It's amazing, just the weight. What is it? The cargo to the weight of the canoe ratio is phenomenal. And we also there's stories in terms of the cedar ribs, where they come from, and what that means to us. So for us, just the way it's woven, the way it's designed, the architecture itself is art. It has an emotional trigger for us, and it has a mnemonic value in that it reminds us of our ancestors, but it also reminds us of 7 generations ahead. So all those stories are embodied in, for me, when I look at a canoe, it's like it's an encyclopedia. But the art, which was the original question, yeah, very, very important, and many different stories are expressed on each and every canoe. Thank you much.
Oh yeah, go ahead, John.
I'm just going to say a little bit. So I'd actually been talking a little bit with Tony Johnson. That's part of the next thing that we're kind of looking at doing is really addressing art and looking at issues of Chinook art revitalization. And in my kind of discussions with him, as well as some of the other Chinook artists, one of the things that keeps coming up is the role that something like Tribal Journeys played in really sort of pushing forward art and getting young people excited about it, and not just art on the canoes themselves, but also with art on regalia and other items attached to the protocols and things. So yeah, it seems to me it's another one of those things, that it's hard to separate anything from anything else, right? It's all interlinked, and certainly art is a really big component of that. So.
I think there's a couple other chapters that deal sort of tangentially with art in that way. So Chris Chapman's work on Tapnadney's models, and the way in which they have provided a sort of legacy that is being used to this day. And then we also talk in our introduction a little bit about poetry and the legacy that has had in some of the different works of, say, like Pauline Johnson, and then also Jonathan Goldner Jacobs' work on the sort of embodied aspect of building canoes is kind of building on and touching on the kind of artistic practice of canoes. So hopefully that helps answer that question. We have another question there from Michael Pettit, which asks, what challenges were there in translating your material in Aboriginal languages to English? And so I'll open this up, especially to our panelists, to talk about the way in which that sort of translation happened, either for your projects or as you have worked through it, and what sort of ways have you worked around it? Any takers?
I can give it a shot.
Thanks, John.
Well, one of the things about the canoe is that if you're following the old canoe trails, the portages, there's names for every portage, and there's names for every lake. There's names for every toponymy. There's names for the special sites. ceremonial sites that go back a long ways. And so the more you look at it, the more translations that the older people tell us about when they're with us, and if they're not with us, then they'll take like a memory trip with you when you come back of some things that you might have missed, and some things that might mean something to them that if you saw that. And so the thing is that when you're in the bush, you're thinking in your own language. But at the same time, you're kind of translating to the younger generation to some degree. And after a canoe trip, then you start to talk about your trips.
So I have kind of an answer for this. So we didn't have to translate any of our language in order to make this chapter happen. We did incorporate words into Chinookan words into the chapter. Obviously, like with the names of my children. But I think one of the important things, if we're talking about cultural revitalization and language revitalization, we use the canoe and canoe journeys, just like for art, like what John was talking about with art, is that, it's an opportunity for youth to latch onto the language. We speak Chinook in the canoe. We speak it when we ask permission to come ashore. We use the language, just giving directions. So it's been a really important part of the language revitalization because, for a long time, residential schools, boarding schools tried to strip that of us, and they did a really great job in some communities. And so really the canoe has been an opportunity to strengthen the revitalization process.
John, we lost you for a second. I'm glad you're back. I think you cut out just as you were saying that you come back and talk about your trips.
Yeah, well, one of the good things about the canoe is that once you buy them, it's cheap to operate, and it can be used over and over and over, especially if it's made out of Kevlar. But the learning how to carry it, and the way that you walk in a bush, because a lot of these portages are just little paths, and there's grooming that you have to do along the way, and how to put in a boat, how to pack it over and over and over, because it gives a pattern to these things. It gives a schedule in the unconscious mind. Those are positive things that you can pick up, your body can pick up, but the translation of how your mind works and how it comes out in your voice is sometimes it takes a bit of time, but it's there. It's ready for the launching all the time. Masi.
Thank you so much. There's another question here from Bradley Lee. Is there a forward-looking context to the politics of the canoe in terms of bringing more recent settlers and immigrants into paddling culture? And, that question at first really makes me think about Danielle Gendron's concluding chapter, which it describes for, certainly for someone like me, a descendant of settlers who grew up canoeing and thinking, for a long time, thinking only in very general ways about the canoe's connection to, environmental knowledge to Indigenous culture and presence in the land. And Danielle's chapter, which is called Unpacking and Repacking the Canoe as Research Vessel, is really sets out a number of steps that you can take to think more consciously about the really specific meanings of where you are canoeing and how you are canoeing and how you are, what you are doing. That is, involves much more than just a kind of connection with, wilderness or a leisure or recreational activity. So, she calls it Canoe as Research Vessel, and there's a lot of research involved in the, packing of her canoe for a canoe trip that she describes here. But it is also, very much about the kind of intricacies of a connection with a place and with its people that can come from then paddling a canoe in the way that she describes. So, I'm happy that chapter, it does seem to kind of finish the book and in a way that can carry lots of us forward in a different way, in a different kind of relationship to these boats and this activity. But I don't know if anyone else wants to answer that question. I wish Danielle was here and she could talk about it more, but she couldn't be here today.
I'll maybe say a little bit. I don't know if this is directly connected to the question, but it did kind of make me think of, for instance, some of the reactions that I've gotten, especially when talking with non-native people about things like tribal journeys. And one of the sort of frustrations for me is that sometimes there can be this sort of equating this with sort of historical reenactment, right? Or this sort of, well, how can I get involved in this, and not really understanding the sort of, what's actually going on, right? That this is not historical reenactment. This is, as the Chinook say, like the Chinook everyday, right? This is lived life, and it has these sort of important meanings. So, so for me, it's one of the things that I'm hoping to try to accomplish with this work, that, is to have a chance for especially non-natives to see the kind of depth of what is happening here, and that these are not sort of recreational reenactment events, right? And I think Bruce has covered this in his book too. He has a great passage that we actually quoted. I can't remember if we quoted it in this chapter, but I know I quoted it in the other book about, this sort of recreational canoeing, and sometimes people envisioning themselves as living in the past while they're doing this canoeing, right? And that's not what this is in this situation. So there is that little bit of tension there that I think is important to sort of point out.
Thanks, Joe. There's another question here, but I'm actually not sure where it's going. So George Monroe, you've written about our treaties and sovereignty and nationhood, also our lands. What's happening with the government not honoring our treaties? And I know if we ask this question, we can get a huge response. We have probably, an amazing set of expertise on the line here. But if you also wanted to add more specifics as to where you wanted to go with that, you're welcome to put that in the chat or in the question and answer. But does anybody on the panel want to talk a little bit about how this, how these practices have helped your negotiation and your sort of interaction with the colonial governments? I know in each case it's a very different sort of relationship, and I think they're all really, really awesome stories to tell. Go ahead, John.
I'll give it a shot. Well, the whole country of Canada is built on treaties, going from the early 1600s until today and continuing into modern times in the fulfillment of those treaties. But it's the willingness and the abilities of teaching our young people about their history and embracing modern education, so that you have the views of both worlds under your belt. And the thing about the treaties is that there's two ways of looking at it. One is that we're a treaty party, and the other one is a representative of the people. And those things were never fulfilled. And so that's what the negotiations are about, is to make our way into Canada with all the benefits that come with it. And that means, that we would have something for our youth to re-strengthen their connection to the land. That's what it's about, is strengthening your relationship to the land, to your language, to your culture, and your way of life. But part of a land claim settlement is that you have a corporate structure, and that corporate structure is just generally to ensure that you always have a relationship with the governments that you're working with. But the majority of the activities that you do is really to yourself, to strengthen your relationship to your original world, your original worldviews that you've always had, but was intercepted in the last 150 years. And one of the things about negotiations is that you're going for recognition. It's not about taking anything back, because you've never really given up anything. What you're doing is that you're going for recognition of what's important to you, to have the resources to really do something that means to you, that you design yourself, and not having to follow where we've been led to for the last 150 years. Thank you.
So I could talk about treaties and relationships with the federal government for days. So I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to talk about the relationality between the canoe and building support. So as part of tribal journeys and any of our protocols that we do and our travels that we do, we act as ambassadors basically for our community. We're interacting with the world in the way that our ancestors have taught us to interact with the world. And so on these tribal journeys, we travel from village to village, and we get to know folks that we've had intergenerational relationship with. We get to know folks that we might have not had intergenerational relationships with. And we build allies. As the book talks about, Chinook Indian Nation is in a precarious situation with the federal government of the United States, where the federal government has neither ratified nor denied our treaty. And we're in a really gray area where we don't have a formal recognition. We're in the process of clarifying our status. But the relationships that we build on Canoe Journey are so important. We have Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, who really publicly supported us in recent times and have been supportive. We travel with them. We traveled with other neighboring communities that we, on journeys that have since and for decades supported Chinook Indian Nation. And so this is really important one of the federal government's reasonings for stripping us of our federal acknowledgement was that people don't see us, outside communities don't see us as Indians, where we know from travel journeys that that's not true. Our neighboring tribal community does see us, they know us. And so this really, in getting letters of support and getting testimonial support and getting, resolutions of support from these neighboring communities have been very helpful in our fight against the federal government. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Larry. Did you want to add anything to that? You've spoken, about the connection between canoe building and sovereignty as well, and the relationship to treaty. Do you want to chime in here?
Sure. I'm thinking, just since I've sat here listening to John and Rachel, I've had about a half dozen stories. So now yet more pop in my head. So pick one. Well, I know Chuck and I have had to assert our sovereignty when it comes to harvesting and harvesting sustainably. We've done it in a way that takes more work, but it means you can come back 20 years later and harvest bark again. So you're not taking the tree. And this might even be in forests that are already part of a forest management plan and designated to be cut. And when they get cut, it's usually by the time they let you know they've done a birch cut, and there might be some bark there. A lot of times the process is advanced and the bark is maybe usable, but it's not nearly as good as if you get it beforehand. So, we've had to push back on our sovereignty, but I would say in almost all cases, it's worked out very well. It's, and part of exercising sovereignty is exercising sovereignty. I remember one elder that said, if you wait for government to give you sovereignty, you'll be waiting a long time. So sometimes you have to know that you're standing on, call it moral high ground, but you know that you're consistent with what has been agreed to within the treaties. And John's absolutely right. The treaties have not been fulfilled. And I say it happened in 1815 at the end, when the Americans and the British negotiated. There were no Indigenous people at the Treaty of Ghent. Article 9 affirmed all rights and all treaties up to that point, but there was no enforcement mechanism, and that was by design. And by the way, the British were attempted to negotiate the deal between Tecumseh and General Brock, which was a pan-Indigenous state in what is now the Midwestern states and the Prairie provinces. But that was quickly rejected by the Hawks, the Southern Hawks, and led by Henry Clay. That was 1815, and to me, from that point on, there was, despite the British understanding the ceremonial relationship, and for example, the Treaty of 1764, and their understanding of it, their understanding of oral history, that morally, ethically, there was an abandonment of what was a sacred promise made by both sides in solemn ceremony. And so talking about reconciliation now, it still looks like a big mountain to climb, but at least we're having the talk. And the canoe continues to be literally, I don't know if it's a bridge builder, but it takes us from two independent points. It crosses that divide between us. And it's that space in between that we referred to, and that I referred to in Pathways 1, and the ceremonies and where we brought the canoe for better caretaking of the land. It's so that canoe is still, and that, by the way, the treaties or the conventions on climate change and biodiversity are treaties. They're global treaties. And so the canoe has been brought into the Canadian context to show how among the targets are, the Aichi targets are the 118 is recognizing Indigenous peoples' ways of knowing, knowledge systems, including Indigenous peoples in the process. And that's supposed to inform the other targets. So again, the canoe helped in Canada people understand that connection and approach conservation. And so Canada's conservation vision that evolved with forestry, with mining, with agriculture at the table, in the first recommendation has things like to accept Indigenous worldviews that recognize we are one species among many sharing the land. And the next bullet is that Canada shall achieve its conservation goals through reconciliation. We say reconciliation with the land. Those are treaty processes. They may be not looked at that way, but in truth they are. And the canoe is a big part of it. Miigwech, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Larry. John, Bruce, and I just realized we don't know how long this event goes for. Do we have time for a last question, or are we supposed to wrap up at 8:30?
Oh no, absolutely. You can absolutely ask a final question.
Well, this comes from Glenna Erickson. Hi, Glenna. In our lives, names are important. Do you name canoes? And if so, is there a ceremony for this?
Yeah, we named canoes. Actually, I named our canoe. I said its name, one of our canoe's names, in my passage that I read aloud. Cushman is one of our canoes. And there's actually a very interesting story of Cushman, which actually can be found in Chinook Resilience. But we actually had a big community gathering and blessing and naming of Cushman. And, it's a really, the name is super important because actually Cushman means moon. Cushman means moon in Chinook proper, Chinook tradition, the lower traditional Chinook, not Chinook Wawa, Chinook jargon. And so it's part of our language revitalization that we were talking about earlier. We have a tradition, a protocol that when somebody passes, we don't say their name. And Cushman happened to be the name of a chief. And when they passed, it was like right around the time that, the initial settler colonialism was happening and diseases were going through. And so the English word moon was introduced at that time. And so we didn't say the name, and then therefore it wasn't really prevalent in the Chinook Wawa language, or, the trade language that was used. And so for a long time, people stopped saying the name. And so, canoes, if you take care of them correctly, like you're supposed to, they'll be around for a long time. And so that name will be carried on. And so, yeah, we have, multiple canoes in our community. We have Skakpul, we have, oh my gosh, we have quite a few other ones, but we did mention in our chapter Cushman.
John, is it a Hicho practice to name canoes or not?
Well, we haven't gone there yet, but what we've been doing in the last number of years was assigning boats, like canoes. And so whoever is assigned to, that's their boat for that, for the leg of that trip, for the complete leg of that trip. And so it's always renewing itself on an annual basis. I'll see.
Larry, do you know, does Chuck name the boats that he builds?
Okay, just a second here. Yeah, okay. Well, we both have, and we've even yeah, I can think of one circumstance. Anyway, there is a ceremony, and then the name comes out of that ceremony. It comes from that ceremony, and it can be very different. But I guess way back when in the questions, just to support what I heard, we say that when you create something, it has a spirit. So part of the naming ceremony is to acknowledge that spirit. And the name reflects what is seen in terms of that spirit. So, miigwech.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're coming to the end of our time together. It's been so lovely, and it's so nice to reflect back on, you know, what a meaningful journey this whole process of putting this book together has been for me, and to visit with you. Some of the contributors here once again, and again, Cameron, Chris, Hillary, Ian, we see you there in the audience too. It's just nice to know you're here. And yeah, one of my favorite things I was saying earlier about putting this book together were the collaboration, the kind of collaborations even across, you know, across contributors who started then working together after meeting and workshopping their book chapters, collaborations across different communities and different disciplines. And for me, as a literary scholar who usually works like very much alone on things, reading my books and writing about them, it was a really new experience and really, really wonderful and really, really rich. And once again, you know, it has transformed what I think about and how I think every time I set foot in a canoe. So I'm grateful to all of you for that, and thanks for coming together tonight. Thanks, Laura, for being here too.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to echo what Sarah was saying, that this has been such a wonderful experience, and I'm really glad that you guys indulged us in writing and in these chapters, and that those of you that came tonight came to help us, you know, sort of launch this book. We really look forward to all that gets said in the future conversations about it. So thanks very much, everybody. So with that, I think, yeah, I'll pass it back to John. There you go.
Wonderful. No, thank you, Bruce. And thank you, Sarah. Thank you to all of tonight's panelists. Thank you to all of you out there in the Zoom webinar right now, and to all of you watching on YouTube now or in the future. Thank you very much for your attention, your excellent questions and comments. Rest assured, I'll send all those along to the panelists after this. This video will remain live on YouTube, so if you'd like to revisit it or share it with anybody, please feel free to do so. If you received an invitation, the link to the YouTube stream is right in there, so it's easy to find. Otherwise, the book is The Politics of the Canoe, available from McNally Robinson in person, over the phone, or online. I'd like to extend our great thanks to the Canadian Canoe Museum for helping to spread the word around this event, and to Laura, of course, for participating herself tonight, and to all the good folks at the University of Manitoba Press for bringing this book into the world in the first place and giving us another reason to gather and hear from all these incredible speakers tonight. So thank you all so very much once again. Have a lovely evening.